At that point in time, I was probably gaming on average 8 or 9 hours a day. They very much looked at it as you're an addict and you need to detox from your addiction. One of my big concerns, truthfully, going into Restart was I was 27 years old at the time, and I figured I've spent 27 years building all of these bad habits. How am I going to enter a facility and break 27 years of bad habits in 45 days? I always felt like when I was trying to quit gaming on my own, it was, like looking into a forest and knowing there's a target out there and I need to go, shoot this bow and arrow and hit the target. But how, where? I don't see it. I can't do that. It doesn't make sense. But in joining up into a community of other people that have been there is, now here's the trail and a guide to walk me along the way.
Hi, welcome to MedCircle's It's All in Your Head podcast. I'm your host, Jackie Colbeth, and it's great to be with you. After experiencing my own mental health struggles, I know the power in sharing our stories. So today we are going to be talking about what it's like to live with a digital addiction to online gaming. I am so excited to introduce Charlie Bracke. Charlie found himself addicted to online gaming and was desperate to find help for something that treatment centers around the U.S. didn't even address at the time. Charlie was finally introduced to Restart Life, where he underwent intensive treatment to kick his digital addiction. On last week's episode, we met one of the co-founders of Restart Life, Dr. Hillary Cash, who shared the clinical side to this issue, but today we'll get to learn a little bit more about the lived experience side of this issue, thanks to Charlie's candor. He's an inspiration to so many, and we're very excited he took time out of his busy schedule to chat with us. Charlie, welcome to It's All in Your Head. Charlie, welcome to It's All in Your Head.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Awesome. We're really excited to have you. I am really excited to bring to our audience more information about this topic because I think we literally all know someone, maybe multiple people, who is struggling with a different form, I'm sure, of digital addictions. They kind of run the gamut. And I know that's maybe a generic term. And I know your struggle was more specifically with video games, but I'm really excited for you to share your experience, strength, and hope with us, as I think this is definitely a problem that hasn't gotten its due attention by any means. So I'm just really excited to hear more about it.
I'm 100% with you. I think the pandemic has probably been a really bad situation for digital gaming and addiction and everything to go through.
Yes.
A moment when we can isolate with technology and be responsible is going to make a lot of people act out in ways that they wouldn't have otherwise, and build a future of a lot more addicts that hopefully could use some support.
No, definitely. So as I'm thinking back, the first video game I ever played was The Legend of Zelda. I'm old. The Legend of Zelda on Nintendo. There wasn't even Wi-Fi available, right, at that time. And even though it wasn't something that I was really into, it certainly left a very memorable mark as I'm recalling it. And I'm wondering, do you remember the very first video game that you played or that you thought, oh, this is awesome?
As far as the first one I ever played, absolutely not. I was gaming like before I had solid memories formed.
Okay.
My dad is a bit of a computer geek. And so, we always had a computer in the house because he enjoyed fiddling around and designing programs, whatever. He just liked it for himself. And that always meant that we had computer games in the house as well. And so from the time I was, 2 years old, I was booting up games on MS-DOS. And the first game I really ever got super hooked on was Ultima Online when I was about 9 years old, playing on dial-up internet. And it was a whole different beast back then, but it was just as potentially addictive then as it as it is now, if not worse now.
Was it kind of a slow, but starting at 2, as far as your first exposure, would you say it was sort of a slower build, or did you feel yourself becoming more and more attracted to being in the game and maybe spending more and more hours? I'm kind of wondering how slippery the slope was.
It was always my hobby. I always really defined myself as a gamer.
Yeah.
And so, elementary school, middle school, when I had the free weekend, I was going to spend the whole thing playing video games.
Yeah.
I was always really deep into it. The piece that was a little slipperier was how much of a hold I had on the rest of my life. Because most of my time through the end of high school, I was a straight A student. I had no problems getting my homework done. I had a job in high school that I worked 30 hours a week. And so my gaming would come and go just depending on my other circumstances, what was going on in life. It wasn't really until I left for college for the first time that I started having a lot of issues with how much time I was spending on it. And the lack of oversight really allowed my addiction to take off.
Yeah, college is definitely good for that, right? I can certainly recall, and the audience knows, I quit drinking many years ago, but when I went to college, also I was National Honor Society in high school and all that good stuff you talk about. But as soon as I went to college, I almost flunked out my first semester. I mean, that time was literally dedicated to just, drinking and doing all sorts of drugs, totally unchecked. It made it exceedingly difficult, kind of barely able for me to get through. And I'm wondering if you had struggles going into freshman year, sophomore year, with maintaining the gaming and the load of college.
I actually started out, it kind of just tapered down. My freshman year, I did decent, not as good as I did in high school, but I still had around a 3.0 GPA. So, not the worst either. No. I had dealt with the first instances of depression my freshman year of college. And so that was kind of a new experience all around for me that I didn't do well with. Yes. So the further into college I got, the more I isolated, I withdrew. I really thought it was just depression, and that was why I was spending so much time gaming. I just can't get myself going in the morning, sort of a thing. And so my grades continued to decline until end of the first semester of my junior year. I had about a 0.4 GPA. Yep. And that was when I finally had to own up to my parents that things weren't going well. And I felt like I needed to leave college for my own mental health.
Sure.
And so that was ended up being exactly what I did. I dropped out under a hardship withdrawal for depression, and I moved back in with my parents and went into what I think of now as kind of my functional addict days, where I went back to working at Pizza Hut, which was my high school job, but I did really well and got promoted a few times, and turns out it wasn't just the depression that was causing issues.
Yeah, it's really almost like a comorbidity, really. They go sort of hand in hand. I can certainly relate to that. Did the change in lifestyle and removing yourself from college and moving back in around a support system, and you immediately started working again, did you see any improvement, or was it just sort of, you were maintaining?
Yes and no. The depression definitely started to feel like it was getting better.
Okay.
But the gaming continued to increase. At that point in time, I was probably gaming on average 8 or 9 hours a day. My entire routine was to wake up, go to work, come home, play video games, sleep, repeat. And that was 7 days a week. That was my entire life.
So really, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's not even so much the hours dedicated as what it does to you mentally, impacts relationships. I know with substance abuse, it's quite easy to kind of call the other person out on their behavior. You were drunk and did this, and you said that, and you were out of your mind. How were you approached about gaming, which a lot of people would say, well, Charlie just really likes to game, it is his hobby. How were you first approached by loved ones or friends that maybe said like, hey, Charlie, maybe this is like moving into the realm of negatively impacting personal relationships?
Truth be told, that didn't come for quite a few years after I dropped out.
Yep.
It wasn't until I was actually working as a real estate agent. I had moved out of Indiana to Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. I was not doing well because I was spending so much time gaming, and I eventually got kicked off of my real estate team for not producing enough results. And that was when my parents approached me, not even thinking of it as an addiction at the time, but just as, hey, do you think you would be doing better maybe if you didn't game as much? And so that was what led to me trying to give up gaming for the first time. I lasted about 4 weeks. I had, gotten rid of my computer, just stashed it out in the garage of the house I was renting, and I made a really big sale. I felt like I'd been working really hard to get back on track, and I deserved to celebrate that sale. And so I did with a night of gaming. Set my computer back up and started at 5 p.m. when I finished up, writing contracts and everything. And I stopped at about 4 a.m. that morning. I told myself when I woke up that really one night wasn't fair to me, given how much time and effort I had put into that deal. And I should give myself a week to play video games. And I fell right back into old habits of, wake up, play video games, go to bed, repeat. And the end of the week came and passed, and I didn't want to give it up. I didn't want to go back to not playing video games.
And you got to a point which I applaud anybody who recognizes there's something that's not benefiting them, that's not enhancing their life, whether they come to that slowly or quickly. When you came to that realization, where could you turn, if anywhere? I know that rehabilitation centers for substance abuse are a dime a dozen, right? You can make, phone calls in any state, and you could probably get like hundreds and hundreds of places. And I'm wondering, how difficult was it for you to get in touch with the type of people that can actually help with this specific addiction?
It was incredibly difficult and a very frustrating process. By the time I actually accepted that I was an addict, I needed help. I couldn't do this on my own. I have very distinct memories of sitting on the couch in the house I was renting with my mom, and just trying to Google any sort of addiction helpline to find out who is out there that is willing to take a video game addict and try and help me get past this, because I clearly couldn't do it myself.
Yeah.
And we called and called and called and found out that different numbers would route back to the same call centers. And so we ended up talking to the same people multiple times. And we tried reaching out directly to some rehabilitation centers. And some of them were willing to we think we could probably make a program, but it's really not what we do here. We're more focused on substance abuse, sort of a thing. And we actually got really lucky. Eventually, we called another new helpline that routed us back to one we had already talked to, except the gentleman there that had spoken with my mom previously had talked to his supervisor, who had heard of Restart. That was all he knew. That was absolutely everything, is, hey, there's a place called Restart that deals with tech addicts. And so we ended up finding them online then. Their web presence back then was not as good as it is now. That was mid-September, and I had a bed in the facility by mid-October then.
Okay. And I know I was certainly curious, having been to traditional rehabilitation centers, like the ones that you have called the inpatient, like the 28-day plus places. I'm wondering, there's so much curiosity, really. I think that kind of what goes on, right, when you enter that facility. Like, I could tell you my experience, and the different exercises or therapy groups, or just the
Mhm.
way that the different rehabilitation centers focused their therapy. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about what was it like walking into that facility, and what do you think some of the unique, I would say, aspects of the program that you found exceptionally helpful?
I don't think Restart is necessarily all that different from other rehabilitation centers.
Yep.
They very much looked at it as you're an addict and you need to detox from your addiction.
Yes.
And so that was what a lot of it was. The big unique piece that I'm not certain if it's the same for substance abuse centers, but because of the amount of time that myself and my fellow addicts spend, we don't know what to do with ourselves in detox anymore.
Yes.
And so they had an absolutely packed schedule from the moment you wake up until the moment it's lights out. You had something to be doing, I think, all but about 30, 45 minutes of the day. And so it really was, wake up, shower, breakfast. You had first group by 9 a.m. That group ran until 10:30. You were off until 10:45. When you started lunch prep, by 11:30, 11:45, you were starting your afternoon group, or we were going on our way to a 12-step meeting. We'd get back, we'd exercise, dinner prep, evening group, evening meeting to close out the day, lights out, and there just was no time to do anything except therapy activities, which was really good because like I said, I didn't know what to do with myself in the meantime. I was used to spending 14 hours a day on average sitting in front of the computer. And now all of a sudden I have literally no electronics. We have one house phone for everybody to share, but you don't get your cell phone. There's no computers. There's a TV that was no access to it whatsoever, except for watching one movie a week. So there's nothing to do except be in groups, be with yourself, and work on getting better.
Is there any type of, again, just my experience with substance abuse, you can get withdrawal symptoms, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, vomiting, sweating, a lot of the physical stuff, but also with that comes an intense amount of anxiety for a lot of people. And I'm wondering, since obviously, anything digital, you're not ingesting, right, physically into your body, but I have to imagine that there is a period, like any addiction, of a withdrawal. And I'm wondering if you can kind of describe the feelings that you had to walk through.
Almost everybody I knew that went through the facility, myself included, had withdrawal for between 1 and 2 weeks.
Yep.
For me, it was, I want to say 11 days, 12 days thereabout. I was just absolutely exhausted all the time. The second my head would hit the pillow, I'm out. I could barely make it through the 12 hours a day that I was awake and doing things.
Yeah.
I was extremely irritable. One story that always comes back to me, I woke up, I wanted to make eggs for breakfast. I walked into the kitchen to find out I wasn't the first person awake. Somebody was already using the stove to make eggs, and I was pissed. Just absolutely irate, inconsolably angry, and recognized it in the moment that, like, this is not a normal or rational reaction to the situation. The one that's not quite as common, I would think, I had thought my entire life that I was one of those people that didn't dream. I never could remember a dream at all. As it turns out, that's a symptom of excessive time using technology, though. And so when I got back in, it was almost like I had stored up all the weird from my dreams over the years, and it all came crashing out in the next 10 days or so, which definitely didn't help with the being super tired that I'm waking up from really weird dreams every single night, multiple times. But yeah, it turns out I'm not a person that doesn't dream. I just didn't remember them. I couldn't get my mind slowed down enough to dream in the meantime.
And I hear that a lot. Is a common thread for anyone struggling with any sort of mental health or behavioral disorder. I also can relate to that. Does that have more to do with like the brain not entering an REM? I'm wondering what the physical components of what sort of ceases to produce dreams?
That one, I don't know the actual like biological processes or anything. Yeah. I could imagine that it has to do with the brain just being so overstimulated all of the time, all of the waking hours, that I was putting constant video gaming in front of my eyes, that I didn't have anything left come sleep time.
That's rough. That is absolutely rough. Sleep is so important. And I think also as a society, we're not exactly educated on just how important sleep is to mental health until you start getting good sleep. And then you're like, oh, wow, I feel exceedingly
100%.
Exceedingly better in a way that I couldn't describe before. How long was the Restart program? I'm wondering how long you stayed there and worked with them.
So I stayed in inpatient for about 48 days. Mm-hmm. I took about a month off over Christmas to pack up my apartment, move all of my stuff into storage, because I wanted to come back and participate in their outpatient portion as well. One of my big concerns, truthfully, going into Restart was I was 27 years old at the time, and I figured I've spent 27 years building all of these bad habits. How am I going to enter a facility and break 27 years of bad habits in 45 days? It just didn't feel realistic to me that was going to happen. So I was very excited to hear that they had a transition phase where the whole idea is that you're no longer living in the safe bubble of inpatient. You now share an apartment with other people who have graduated from inpatient. Mm-hmm. And we still want you coming into the facility to spend your time working in the groups, and slowly start replacing some of the recovery-focused activities that we're spending all day doing with the other just responsible adult activities. And so that was exactly what I ended up doing then. Going back and just being on my own, but going back to the facility for every daily session, all of the workouts, everything. And then getting a job again. And so, okay, now I don't have time, so I'm going to pull back on some of these groups while I go work.
Sure.
And just slowly replace everything with the things that I should have been spending all of my time doing in the past and never quite got a hold of.
Yeah. And how long was the outpatient effort? Just to kind of give our audience an idea, this is not a 28-day stay, you're in, you're out. How long collectively, not to intimidate anybody, but just to kind of give them, realistic idea of the amount of work that you have to put in?
I participated in the outpatient portion for 10 months after I left the inpatient portion. So altogether, I was in Restart. It ended up being just shy of a year.
Okay.
Between their two phases.
That's great. That's great. And I know it was a bit difficult to find somebody who had a focus in this, had mm-hmm. expertise in this. And I'm wondering if you can recall, was there something just absolutely mind-blowing you learned there that really just kind of drove home, whoa, this is not only, an issue, but this is probably an issue that's even greater than I thought, even though I lived it?
That's a tough question. I don't know how much I would say it's, mind shattering to me or anything. Getting to know some of the other people's circumstances, though, some of the other lived experiences of the guys that I met while I was in inpatient was very eye-opening to me, that in a lot of ways I had been very lucky. I had held on to my life much better than a lot of other people had. Yeah. I think the average age of people that was attending at that time was about 19, and I was entering as a 27-year-old.
Wow.
So, a lot of people, in my eyes, got luckier in that they got to get their lives back on track earlier than I did. But it is just absolutely pervasive is the other thing, that, people from all walks of life were trying to get in. It didn't matter who you were. It was like all of this push to get people on technology and comfortable with computers and everything we didn't know the side effects of doing that. We hadn't seen as a society yet what happens when you spend all day, every day on a computer. And so it was a ton of ridiculously smart people that I was spending time with in rehab that knew more than myself and could work their way around computers and build games, program all of this amazing stuff, but just couldn't then control their time around it. And so I got a lot of shock out of thinking back to all of the times that, my parents and myself even had, really supported people in, you should spend more time, you should work on that and, get on the computer, do whatever at all ages for people. And then since then, I started working at Costco, and I would see parents walk around that had just handed an iPad to their toddler. And stuff like that scares me now because I know how I got hooked.
Right.
And I had a desktop PC that had dial-up internet.
Yeah.
At that time, they weren't making games with the same intent to be addictive and keep people hooked and coming back as they are now.
Right.
And so I'm just absolutely dumbfounded at anybody that can get out without having a technology addiction. People are so behind the eight ball on it now.
Yes, no, I couldn't agree more. And I've mentioned to the audience, I worked in digital media for almost 20 years, and it's horrifying at times to realize that doctors, psychologists, people are being employed by these places to create different user interfaces, just the places that they put the buttons, it's very insidious. The sounds that the game makes or notification, all of these things so deeply embedded into our psyche is, I think, something people should definitely, be hip to. That is, it's entertainment, sure, but there's also an intent when you're, employing these people and having them design games. And I know that right now in society, to your point, we're going to be behind the eight ball, in my personal opinion, because there is a ton of ignorance still, I think, about just how insidious this particular type of addiction is. And by that, I mean, I'm not falling over drunk and shoving cocaine up my nose. That's someone that you can be like, this person's out of control. And I see it in every way by what she's doing. Whereas, gaming, there's almost this insidiousness of, well, it's not illegal. It's not a hard drug. It's not this, it's not that. But behaviorally, to me, I've noticed it mimics the journey of how one feels when you're like a slave to something you don't want to be a slave to. It's kind of like that push pull. And I love that you highlight the lived experiences. Hence the podcast. I find lived experiences personally to be some of the biggest motivators, and you're really not meeting anybody else with the same lived experience on the road to recovery is you're meeting in recovery centers. I'm really glad that you were able to find Restart and start your journey back to better mental health. Now, I feel like it's impossible to live without a Wi-Fi connection or a telephone today. I can live without Jack Daniels, but people, I would imagine now, trying to strike a balance must be exceedingly difficult, just because I don't know if you can even be operational in society in an extended period without that. Was there a period of time, obviously you had mentioned early on in the inpatient, I'm wondering, how does one kind of reincorporate that enough to not trigger like an epic relapse and just, gaming all the time again?
Oh yeah. No, that is very much at the front of our minds, because as you said, there is no living without it. Right. You unless you want to go be a hermit in the mountains, you're going to be using technology. And so truthfully, that is the ultimate goal, is just building a healthy relationship with technology and not letting it dominate everything that we're doing all the time. And so when I came back into the outpatient portion, I had a flip phone, no computer. I wouldn't go to the library because they had public access computers, and that was it. I avoided using it at work. I got a job working the meat counter of a grocery store because I knew I wouldn't have to touch any technology there. Everything I did had to be very methodical and test out what is this going to do to my life if I try and add this next little piece back in.
Yep.
And that was one of the things that having that outpatient portion was so helpful for, is that I had these experienced people there guiding me and trying to say, like, okay, yeah, you've been doing well with having a flip phone. I think probably it is okay for you to start going to the library, and you can start using the computer there just to feel it out and see how you're going to react with it. Like, okay, that's going well. So did you want to try getting a smartphone back or not? And so everybody ends up kind of drawing their own lines with what they're comfortable with. I'm many years out from rehab now, and you can see me on a computer here. I have my own laptop again. I spent a lot of years without Wi-Fi in my house because I wasn't comfortable with that. In the last few years, I found that to be a necessity to have. Just I wanted to go to school and it was online, so you got to do what you got to do. Yep. I have friends that have been out of Restart as long as I have that still don't have computers. I have other friends that have been out as long as I have that never wanted to go back to a smartphone. They still use a flip phone with no apps, no camera, nothing. Just I can call and text and that's it.
Yep. And
so I guess the answer to your question of how do you get it back is a piece at a time and see what works. If it doesn't work, take it away and take a step back and reassess.
Do you think the camaraderie of meeting people at different points within their journey, when you try to identify like what starts to chip away at the desire, right? Because early on, you can talk to people, but like that nagging desire, is kind of there. It's like still super strong, right? So would it be accurate to say that maybe the more you connected with other people that can relate to you, that kind of was sort of the magic potion, so to speak, of kind of chipping away at that initial kind of panic and desire to really even dive back into it?
100%. That was truthfully one of the first things I noticed the first night I walked into Restart, was just having this other group of people around that their experiences were not the same as mine. But when I told them, like, I'm having a bad day, I just want to go get lost in a game, they just get it. They just understand and know exactly that feeling because they've been there themselves. Even when it didn't take away from that urge to go get away and lose myself, it really helped just to have those people around that could, hey, like, you're struggling right now, like let's get out of here, let's go play disc golf, something like, let's just go occupy ourselves and not be sitting here feeling bad. And that's one I found all over the place, not just at Restart. I frequented 12-step meetings. I still do. I have a sponsor, and I found a lot of love and appreciation from everyone I've met in those rooms, that they just get it. And it didn't matter if I was talking to somebody who was addicted to porn or cocaine or alcohol or anything. Everyone just understood it. We all had our own drug of choice.
Yep. And
everyone was using for the same reason, though. And, when I heard people talk in AA meetings about why they drank, it could have been describing me and my story. It was that to a T. And I couldn't do this without other people around that had those same experiences themselves.
Yeah, it's definitely hope is a major component, I think, into anybody trying to get better, trying to better their life. As humans, we have to kind of see things, right? Like, I'm watching this person do well. I'm watching them improve their life. They're giving me a baseline from, having difficulty finishing college, to going back to school, to starting careers, all these wonderful things. I think if you're not fortunate enough to witness that, it must be infinitely harder, whatever your poison is, to really take those steps. And I'm glad to hear that you
Absolutely
still continue.
I always felt like when I was trying to quit gaming on my own, it was, like looking into a forest and knowing there's a target out there and I need to go, shoot this bow and arrow and hit the target. But like, how, where, I don't see it. I can't do that. It doesn't make sense. But in joining up into a community of other people that have been there is, now here's the trail and a guide to walk me along the way. Somebody who has tripped over that route over there and can tell me like, hey, look out, it'll get you.
Right.
That human connection side of it can't be understated.
Yes. And I have to imagine that it was probably intimidating reconnecting, I would think, like with other humans. There's almost like a social aspect, right, that gets chipped away at when you're addicted to anything and your focus is kind of just, what is going to satisfy me as fast in the moment. With your continued recovery, et cetera, I know that it sounds like you definitely have, a plan of action. I always like our audience to understand that, as soon as you leave any sort of treatment, it's not over. If you'd like to maintain any sort of semblance of mental health. And it sounds like you've been able to do that through various support groups, sponsors, talking to other people. Is there anything else that you can point to that you could share that was essential or really key in addition to that to your recovery journey?
Honestly, one of the biggest things, and it could be something that's a bit more specific to gaming addicts, but I was spending all my time alone, isolated. I had a group of my online gaming friends, but it was all people I'd never met in person. You don't really know who these people are, no matter how long you've been playing together. And so one of the things that I never really thought about beforehand was how important it was for me to start doing social activities in person with people again, outside and even above and beyond finding new activities to fill my time with, was finding people to spend time doing those activities with. Being able to reconnect was absolutely critical to me feeling better, and me feeling better then made me not want to go game as much because I didn't have any reason I wanted to isolate. I didn't have any reason that I felt I needed to lose myself and just stop thinking for a little bit. And, I had spent so long and tapered down to that so slowly that I didn't realize what I was missing, really.
Right. No, that's an excellent way to put it. And I think now more than ever, even if you're not particularly addicted to any one digital platform, gaming, et cetera, kind of thematic in society, whether it's dating apps, everything is kind of taking place in this digital world, and people are kind of losing empathy. They're losing that human connection, but some generations don't even know what that connection feels like. I think of much younger people that you might put in a room and it would be kind of like a deer in headlights situation, right? Like that, people like me, I can kind of recall, what that's like to make those human connections. But I have to imagine at first it's probably quite stressful in feeling like, am I doing this right? Is this going to be helpful? And just kind of walking through the anxiety of, not having the screen as a distraction.
Yeah. No, the screen gives a really nice buffer that makes socializing easier, but at the same time, it also diminishes how effective that socializing really is. And so I can absolutely appreciate and felt the concern of trying to get back out there and relate to people again. I realized, fairly late into my addiction that I didn't know how to talk to you unless you wanted to talk about video games.
Yeah.
I had lost so much of my social skills, and my, not to mention my hobbies and anything else outside of video games. But it got to the point where that was it. That was who I was. And if you didn't want video game talk, then I don't have anything to say to you. Yeah. And move on. I'll go online and talk to my buddies there that know exactly what I mean.
Sure.
And so moving back into trying to reconnect with people was extremely stressful.
Yeah.
Especially that combined with, like, I'm in Washington now and I didn't grow up here. And how do I tell people why I moved to Washington? Sure. How do I approach the subject of being an addict with people that may not even think that this is a real thing? It was a really hard arena to get back into.
You literally led right into my next question, which was, how was this received? I mean, I can recall specifically if I'm out and I tell someone I don't drink, which I've been telling them for almost the last 2 decades, I've had every reaction from really kind to really unkind when I would share that with people. And I'm wondering what you fielded as reactions, or maybe what you thought the most ignorant reactions are, and how did you explain that to people? Because I think that's a really normal concern when you're getting off anything that the rest of society either isn't off themselves or never had a problem with it. It's you almost feel under a microscope a little bit. So I'm wondering, what were some of the different reactions from people when you do tell them, hey, I don't game anymore. It was an issue. It was impacting my life in a negative way. And so I'm wondering what reactions to that are.
By far and away, support.
Good.
Almost everyone is supportive. Not to say that there haven't been those that, roll their eyes really hard at me or whatever. Truthfully, the biggest thing that surprised me, I had anticipated that older people would be more resistant to the idea that this is a problem, and younger people would be more supportive and believe that, like, yeah, that absolutely, I get it. And my perception was flipped. And the only thing I can think is that younger people are more likely to be addicted to the same technology and have the same issues that I had. And so being confronted with the fact that you can be addicted to technology now inherently raises the question of what's their relationship with technology like. But almost everyone is just supportive. Everybody's like, yeah, you have a problem, sweet, don't do that anymore. And whatever I can do to help you in that journey, let me know. And I would venture to guess that that's probably fairly consistent, that people want to help any addict to get past whatever their issue is.
Yeah.
And those that struggle themselves are not wanting to look in the mirror and to see that issue that they have.
That's really heartening to hear. I agree. By and large, I think people are supportive of anyone who has the courage to look at some very scary things, maybe within themselves. It's certainly not an easy task. And I would guess that the minority of people addicted to any sort of digital addiction, I would gather most probably don't get off it. I have to imagine you're a small and mighty bunch, but leading the way as examples for people who might start to suspect, this is an issue.
Well, truthfully, that's exactly why I enjoy talking about this with everyone I can, because I know what it was like 7 years ago when I was trying to find a way to get better and I couldn't do it. And how then I felt when I walked into Restart and here's this group of people that understand. These people who have been living the life that I wanted to get for myself for so long. I have to imagine that there's a bunch of people out there that are in my exact shoes from 7 years ago. And I want to help guide them to communities that we've built over the years to get to where we are now, that it's possible. There are people out there that have found a way to get past a lot of these tech issues and still live in the world today. And that's something that anyone is capable of doing. There's nothing special about me inherently that makes me capable of doing this that somebody else can't.
And that's really a perfect segue into something we always like to ask our guest at the end of any segment, any interview. And that is, what advice would you impart to anybody who's watching us during this discussion that is really, really, really struggling themselves and almost speaking directly to them? What advice could you give the person who's struggling most with a digital addiction that's watching this today?
The first thing I would do is I tell them, look for help. We actually have built a network of online meetings for Internet Technology Addicts Anonymous. A really cool guy named Thomas has built a global network of these meetings. And it's not nearly as good as meeting in person for a 12-step meeting would be. But any help you can get that would start you down that road to start building connections with those people that you want to be more like is a step in the right direction. Don't hesitate. Go start chatting with people, see what their story is, see what they did to try and get better, see what made them feel better in the meantime. What was their rock bottom and how does it compare to your own story? Don't wait. There's no reason to wait. Make the move to make yourself better.
Well, Charlie, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I was really looking forward to this conversation because it's something top of mind. For me, I see it with friends. I think we all know somebody that is probably a little too, attached to the technology, a little too attached to the devices. Mm-hmm. I literally think there's not one person in the world right now that couldn't point to someone that they know or they see that is really kind of unhealthily wed to that. So I just want to personally thank you so much for coming on in being courageous enough to share your story. I know you're going to be helping millions of people, and we're just really honored to have you come on and share your awesome journey of hope with us.
Thank you so much. I absolutely appreciate getting the soapbox here to stand on and shout the message to everyone that will listen. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you again.
No, that's great. And obviously we wish you all the continued success and hope you stay in touch.
Thanks. Back at you.
Thanks, Charlie. Thank you all for joining today's conversation with Charlie Bracke. What I'm reminded of most is that while there are so many different addictions out there, they all will take you to the same dark place in the end. But today we live in a society where it's nearly impossible to find an environment that does not have a Wi-Fi connection. And those who struggle with online related addictions have to remain stronger than ever in the face of something that our survival is depending on more and more, whether we like it or not. I really hope you enjoyed our conversation. If you visit MedCircle.com, you can access tons of other conversations, including weekly workshops with our credentialed doctors, an award-winning video library featuring almost 1,000 educational videos. Become a member of our community today. Visit MedCircle.com to learn more. Thank you for listening to It's All in Your Head, and tune in to my YouTube live recap of this episode with MedCircle host Kyle Kittleson this Wednesday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Take care.